All right, everyone, welcome to chapter 14 of the Warrior Starter class. Now, this chapter is, it's actually one of the really important ones because, as you can see right here, I'm saying trading is 50% skill and 50% mental. So half of success in trading comes from up here. It comes from the mindset. And so, as I had mentioned in one of the previous classes, earlier in my career when I was kind of in a difficult place in life, I was I was in a very unhappy marriage. I was basically looking at the very high likelihood of that ending in divorce. I was trying to learn how to day trade, but I was struggling. I was losing money. I had been at it for over a year, and I had accumulated almost $30,000 of credit card debt. I had lost money in the market, and I was depleting my life savings. And I just felt so much pressure that I needed to make this work, and that maybe that would save my marriage, which that was not savable in any case. So I started seeing Ted. He's a counselor in Brattleboro, Vermont, and a lot of our discussions actually ended up centering around trading, mostly because we got in there and it was like, all right, well, let's talk about the relationship stuff. Do you guys, do you want the same things in life? No. Do you want kids? Yeah. Does she? No. Huh, okay, interesting. She wants to travel all around the world. You like to be a homebody? Well, gonna be honest, doesn't sound good. Doesn't sound good at all. So that was like a 10-minute conversation. So it was basically like, all right, any referrals for a good attorney? And so, we got divorced. And then the rest of the, all my time talking with him was this trading thing, because this was really at the forefront of my mind. This was what I really wanted to figure out. And this was the ultimate puzzle that I was trying to solve. And, the expression that some people use that this can be addictive, in the sense that in my nature, once I start something, I don't finish every project I start by any means, but once I get started on something, I can get so fixated on it. It just feels so difficult for me to walk away with it not resolved. And so with trading, I just wanted to figure it out so badly. And I also, I saw people that were so successful out there. Not that I knew them personally, but I saw people out there that were super successful. And so I felt like it could be done. And it was within my reach, both from a physical aptitude, mental standpoint, and everything else. So I started working with Ted a lot on this, and he helped hold me accountable, and he helped teach me some skills that I still use every single day in my trading. And it's been almost 10 years since I started seeing him, and I still meet with him pretty much every week. And we still talk about my trading, because even today, it's helpful to have that sounding board of what works and what's not working, and where I'm frustrated, or everything else. So for this chapter, I actually have decided to bring Ted on. Ted and Diane have both come on. Both of them are licensed mental health counselors. They both work in their own practices, both with traders like myself and with just general folks, who are wanting some extra help in life. So they're going to host this chapter 14. We're all going to teach it together. Now, at the beginning of chapter 14, I'm going to incorrectly say welcome to chapter 4. It's like the word. I hate when I start something with a screw up like that, but it is chapter 14, rest assured. So this is going to be a 3-part video series taught by Ted, Diane, and myself, and it's going to run about 3 hours long. It's broken into 3 parts. So I encourage you guys to get in there, to enjoy it, making this resource available to you. And as scheduling allows, Ted and Diane are making themselves available for Warrior Pro students to do one-on-one sessions, like Zoom calls, digital counseling essentially. They now, with all this experience they've had with Warrior, with me and with my team of traders, and with some of the Inner Circle students, they've both attended in-person seminars. They now, although they're not traders by their training, they have a good enough understanding of trading that they're able to really be a good support system. But their schedules are limited. So there is a link that we'll provide in the Warrior Pro class. This is only for pro students, not for starter students. So we will circle back on that. We'll probably email pro students that information. So again, that's as schedules allow. So don't be surprised if their schedule is booked out, just because obviously there's probably going to be a high demand for this. But anyway, so with that, we're going to go ahead and get into it. And you can go ahead and watch chapter 14, part 1. with me, Ted, and Diane. And we actually taught this in my office a couple months ago before COVID-19. I think it was in January or maybe February. So this has been sitting on sort of the back burner for a little while, waiting for me to teach this class here, and then we're going to release it. So I hope you guys really enjoy it. And I will also say that I was a little hesitant about including this in the starter class because, as it turned out, it became much higher quality and longer than I expected it to be. But after going back and forth, we decided, okay, we will keep it in the starter class. I think you guys will benefit from it. And we'll continue with this emphasis on the importance of having the mental headspace of a successful trader as we get into the pro classes. All right, so I'll let you guys jump in, and you'll meet me back here in my office for chapter 15. What's up, everyone? All right, so today we're going to get into chapter 4, Intro to the Psychology of Trading. I've got my slides right up here, and we'll be flipping back and forth between the slides and myself, Ted, and Diane. Now, as you guys who are in the Warrior Pro classes know, Ted and Diane host our Mindful Monday sessions and our FOMO Friday sessions. We've got those in the recorded mentor sessions if you want to go back and watch some of the recordings, or if you're able to attend live sessions. Our scheduling, of course, is always subject to change, but you can see what is on the schedule right now. All right, so this is probably one of the most important components of trading, and maybe the most underrated, because people don't really talk about, I don't think people generally talk about the challenge of emotions in trading when they're talking about learning how to trade. Most people are talking about technical indicators, learning how to use the platform, the strategy, all of which is important. But you have this entire emotional component, and I had a little struggle with this even just last week. You and I were in a session, and I was taking some of my notes about what I was really struggling with. And I've in my years of trading, I've had many red streaks, and almost all of the red streaks I can tie back sort of the beginning of it, when the first domino kind of started to fall over, to a mistake that was really in the emotional area, whether it was being emotionally impulsive or having fear of missing out and FOMO and jumping into a stock just without waiting for the pullbacks, impatience, overconfidence. Whatever the cause was, it often is the very beginning of the snowball, starting to roll. Right. And then once I'm red, all of a sudden then the emotions start to increase, and then I'm more apt to continue to make those same mistakes and dig the hole deeper and deeper and deeper. And one of the first times that happened to me, my account, I cut it in half. And it was just when I was starting to build some momentum, and then I had this huge step down, and I didn't know if I'd be able to dig myself out. And the only way that I was able to dig myself out was to be able to really be able to be at peace with those emotions and not act on them when they came up. So this is a very important section. We go into more detail on the emotions and psychology of trading in the Warrior Pro classes, but let's get into it now here with part 1, emotions and trading.
All right. So as Ross was saying, the ability to really begin to look at and identify the emotions that are coming up as you're approaching trading, and working into your process as a trader of really dealing with and having a much more positive relationship with those emotions can vastly increase your ability to make good decisions and not give in to things like FOMO or revenge trading before you even know that it's happening. So I guess we can go ahead and
jump to the next slide.
Yeah. So there are 5 things that we wanted to cover in today's lesson, considering the role of emotions in trading, which is what we've been talking about. And a lot of that is really, it is that consideration of this, even though you might not want emotions to have a role, they're going to.
Yeah.
And so it's coming to accept that is an aspect. Understanding emotional hijack, and that can be really helpful because a lot of us really want to, a lot of us actually do feel like I'm very in control of my emotions, and we are all the way up to the point where we're not.
Right.
And it's just how it is for everybody.
Well, and understanding that emotional hijack is actually something we're hardwired towards.
Yes.
Yeah.
When we're under difficult or threatening situations, we have a whole evolutionary background
Right.
that drives us toward emotional hijack as a way to actually save ourselves.
Right.
So there's really no way to avoid this being part of the equation.
Right. And it's really, in step 2, understanding that emotional hijack can help us to be less hard on ourselves, to be more
Right.
compassionate with ourselves.
Yeah.
So then we get into factors in decision making and the role of patterns, looking at why we make decisions the way that we do,
Right.
and how understanding the patterns that we have can help us see where we might kind of fall down or go astray. Cultivating emotional intelligence. We're going to share with you ways of just expanding on that for yourself as a practice, and then meeting and managing emotions. These are the tools to
Right.
meet the emotional trading and emotional hijack.
Yep. All right, let's jump in. The role of emotions in trading.
So this section focuses on how our emotions, driven by underlying beliefs, influence thoughts and behaviors involved with our trading. Whether these emotions relate more to our trading experiences or to life outside of trading. Harnessing the tools to effectively work with our emotions as we are learning to trade is imperative to long-term successful trading.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so having said that, what do you...
Yeah, well, I think that a lot of what we could talk about related to this, Ross talked about in the introduction. So I think we
Right.
could kind of move on to the next one. Understanding emotional hijack. Emotional hijack occurs when a person's cognitions are overpowered by his or her emotions. During emotional hijacking, the stressors that we react to actually disable the higher cortex of the brain, preventing us from making sound, rational decisions. A person suffering from emotional hijack can become extremely reactive or defensive and lash out in various ways. So in trading, that could be revenge trading, recklessness, self-sabotage. A lot of people that we talk with experience a high level of anxiety that causes, paralysis or hesitation, which
Right.
can be really dangerous
Freezing.
when you're engaged, right, in a trade, and you need to act. So those types of things, fear of missing out, you mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a big one for me because the feeling afterwards, after I have a series of bad trades, is I'm really hard on myself.
Right.
Why did I do that? I knew I should have known that this was breaking a rule, or that this was way too risky, or why didn't I just walk away before it got worse? But I had already passed the tipping point.
Yes,
Right,
that's
exactly.
why.
Right. And so I try to let myself off the hook
Right.
after it's happened,
Right.
knowing that once you've passed that tipping point, your rational mind is just not in the driver's seat anymore.
Right.
Exactly.
And it's in the back seat, it's in the trunk.
It's in the trunk.
Yeah. And so then my focus, and we'll talk about this as we get into a little bit more into this section, is learning to recognize the cues that I may be starting to go off the track.
Right.
And it's hard because you have to know yourself very well. You have to be very honest with yourself.
Mhm.
Many of us who are trading, obviously we're trading because we want to make money. And so there's a part of us that has a really hard time walking away from the market,
Right.
knowing that when you walk away, you're no longer able to continue making money.
Right.
So that feels like the opposite thing to do, especially if you've had a loss. Why would I walk away after losing? I should keep trading.
Keep trading until I'm winning. Yeah.
So it can be very, very difficult. And so it requires, first, for many of us, having a series of these mistakes before developing a sense of awareness around them.
Right.
And then being able to, either through journaling or through shared experiences with our traders, learn some of those common triggers or threshold points where once you cross it, you've passed the point of no return.
Right.
Right. And I think that word "trying," you say, I try to be compassionate, or I try to be easy on myself, and that's the thing. It's a practice. It's like we're always going to be trying. It's always going to be. It's not like one day. It's like you get better and better at it.
Right.
But it's not like it'll ever just be probably automatic of, oh, that didn't matter.
Right.
And that's a hard thing for me to fully grasp because I've been trading for a really long time, and yet I still sometimes make what I feel are these mistakes. And it feels like when you get good at something that you would stop making these mistakes. And so the fact that it's more of a muscle that you always need to kind of strengthen, it's not a skill that you just have and then like a knowledge of riding a bicycle.
Right.
I don't have to think about it, I just have it. And I wish that was the case with trading, but for me it hasn't been.
It's probably the case with some elements of trading.
Right.
Sure.
And that's the difference, is that trading is extremely complex, and like the market can be like it is right now, very volatile and changeable.
Yeah.
And this is why we often talk about managing these things from a relational aspect. Having a relationship with these emotions, with these tendencies towards hijack. And when you think about a relationship, it's not just something that you establish once and then you never have to think about it.
It's dynamic.
It's dynamic. It's ongoing. It's it's changing day to day, and from day to day, even maybe minute to minute, requires a new way of responding. It's
and the other thing about a relationship is that there is caring involved in it. Very similar to when you're trading, there has to be a high level of care, right? And so that is going to generate these feelings that you're talking about. Of why did I make that same mistake, or why didn't I notice I was breaking that rule?
Yeah. And one of the things, when we think about emotional hijack, and especially in the context of challenging or difficult situations, that emotional hijack is actually more of our default. That when you think about trading, the way that it demands such a higher order of functioning to successfully manage the whole process of going through a trade.
Right.
This, even though emotional hijack is a much more primitive aspect of who we are, it's the default for situations under threat.
Yeah, it's that primitive state.
So it's like our system is always wanting to go here.
Right.
And the importance of being kind to ourselves, of having, as you were talking about, that level of self-awareness, to go, okay, this is always going to push me towards this. How do I have a better relationship with it? How do I manage it in a much more productive way is what we're talking about.
Right. Yeah, and I, even just as we're sort of getting into this, those of you guys, may be thinking, wow, it's going to take a pretty high level of emotional awareness to be able to be a profitable trader. And that is true. And it's also true that on any given day, your kind of tank of how emotionally present you're able to be will be different. And there are many days where something happens before you come in to start trading, and that reduces your reserve. And so to set an expectation that as a beginner trader, you're going to trade for 6-hour long day from 9:30 until 3:30, 4 o'clock, that's a very long period of time to expect to be able to maintain emotional center.
Right, exactly.
All right, let's keep going.
Okay, and I wanted to say something about that. You wish it was like riding a bicycle, and I think it's more like riding a unicycle while juggling. Randomly something is being thrown at you, or you might have an uphill or downhill.
Sure.
And maybe all at the same time sometimes.
Yeah.
So having more compassion for the depth of this challenge.
Yes.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of days where the market is easier than others,
right?
Or harder than
others.
others.
I'm on a flat away and I've only got two things to juggle.
Super easy. Right.
So understanding emotional reactivity and hijack. So this slide I really like because it reflects, on the left, I'm going to read this quote, it reflects what's happening in our mind or in our body, and on the right, what's happening in the brain, which, these two things are happening at the same time, but they're kind of parallel. When Pema Chodron said, when faced with emotional overwhelm, we all experience an urge or hook that triggers our habitual tendency to close down. We get hooked in that moment of tightening when we reach for relief. At the subtlest level, we feel a tightening, a tensing, a sense of closing down. Then we feel a sense of withdrawing, not wanting to be where we are and wanting to escape. That is the hooked quality. That tight feeling has the power to hook us into self-denigration, blame, anger, jealousy, and other emotions which lead to words and actions that end up poisoning us. And so we're going to talk more about like managers, firefighters, but in that moment of being hooked, it's kind of the beginning of that process, and then that tipping into the more extreme. In the brain, what is happening, sense organs are sending information to the amygdala or the emotional brain, which in turn sends information to the thalamus, which relays information to the cerebral cortex, the rational brain. Well, the emotional brain is really lightning fast, and the rational brain is
Much slower.
much slower, more methodical. If the amygdala perceives a match to the stimulus, it confirms with RET records stored in the hippocampus. This may signal a fight or flight response in the autonomic nervous system, triggering the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, HPA, to hijack the rational brain. Emotional activity moves faster than the rational brain, so in the case of a match, the amygdala preempts the neocortex. So that's why you're not thinking.
Right.
You know, that's why that's happening. If the amygdala finds no threat match to the stimulus, it acts in accordance with the directives of the neocortex. So there are like fail-safes that are in place, but that part of the brain it's the old reptilian part of the brain.
Right.
It's what we're hardwired when we talk about being hardwired. And when we think about that hooked quality, you know, think about the process that's happening there, and with the emotional brain moving as quickly as it does, we don't have a lot of space to back off once we've, you know, activated the HPA.
And so as I'm listening to this, one of the things that I'm struck by is that, you know, how often when we make an emotionally triggered mistake, that question of why.
Yeah.
Why did I do that? You know,
Yeah.
all the things,
Yeah.
and then the cascade of beating ourselves up.
Self-criticism.
Right. Very rarely do we go, oh, because my brain is hardwired to do that.
Right.
That's why I did it.
Right.
Right.
You know, so in recognizing these moments where we get hooked, understanding that a really large component of how we get hooked is this hardwiring. So, you know, if that's not part of how you're approaching trading, that understanding that, okay, I'm actually going to have to work against my brain
Yeah.
in many ways in order to do this successfully.
Right.
How am I going to keep that in my awareness? How am I going to, on a regular basis, monitor what's happening? This is why we're doing this whole section is, you know, these practices we can put in place to help reduce this emotional reactivity
Yeah.
that we are so hardwired and triggered to.
And there are practices that everyone can practice, and then there are like really specific things that we notice about ourselves that are going to be unique to every person.
Right.
And so going back to, you know, the hooked quality, that feeling of tensing and tightening, if we can catch ourselves there, and every person is going to be a little bit different with how that feels. You know,
Yeah.
some people, it's always the same, like, oh, it's in my neck and shoulders, or some people feel something in their gut, you know, like whatever it is for you, starting to notice some of those physiological indicators. Some people, it's their bodies get really hot, or
Right.
they get really sweaty palms.
Right.
But noticing that and using it as data, noticing what happens for me and then what happens next.
Right. Yeah. And so that's that ultimate kind of challenge, to be able to have that sense of awareness of yourself and to be able to see that, okay, I had 2 good trades, and now I just had a trade where I gave back half my gains, and my immediate feeling is like this tense feeling,
Right.
this frustration, or this I'm not content, I'm not happy, and I can easily act on that emotion and jump into another trade real quickly to try to alleviate that feeling
Yes.
and get myself back to feeling
That's
great,
exactly it.
all-time highs. But more often than not, that is going to be an impulsive decision, an impulsive trade, and more likely will be a loss.
Right.
And you stated that really beautifully. It's that trying to escape or get away from the place that you're in that's super uncomfortable, that
Yeah.
isn't where you want to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and I've heard a lot of traders talk about, you know, it's the temptation to, I need to learn how to trade like a robot.
Yeah.
You know, this understandable desire that if I could just eliminate
Right.
these emotions, then I could, you know, just be pure rational logic.
Yeah.
And the fact that that's just impossible.
And it's the
Right.
opposite of having that dynamic, friendly relationship with yourself that you're
Right.
striving for.
And so when we talk about, you know, really noticing how do you experience this in your body, it's actually becoming a more embodied trader. You know, when I feel these particular emotions, where do I feel them? You know, is it all in my head? Is it my throat, my chest, my belly? These are avenues of broadening our capacity to recognize what is going on right now.
Yeah.
You know, so, you know, do we carry fear in a certain place? Do we carry anger in a certain place? Or even things like, you know, when we start beating ourselves up and the shame, you know, how does that tend to be carried? And this helps us deepen that sense of relationship with ourselves and gives us a greater chance of meeting it all with greater compassion.
Right, in trading and in life.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. One of the things that, and I'll switch to the next slide, you may not expect is that the part of learning how to be a trader, however far a student may get with trading, it forces you, well, you don't have to, I suppose, but it really encourages you to develop this better understanding of your emotions, your reactions, and I have found that in my day-to-day life, it's made me, there's times where I've been frustrated by a culmination of events. It's raining outside and the dog's soaking wet and she jumped in the car and she's scratching on the window because she sees another dog outside and he knocked over my coffee, and it's those moments where things are escalating, and having the sense of awareness of, okay, I'm going to take a breath and I'm not going to snap at this. I'm just going to, see it through.
Right.
And we have to be in the car for the next hour and a half anyway, so I can either do it miserable or I can do it happy.
Right.
And I'm just going to take a breath and let it be. And that, I don't think I would be in that place if it weren't for having to develop the sense of awareness of how emotions can influence my behavior.
Well, and all those things that you were just talking about these other factors that can influence, all of those go into, if you imagine, like our stress tank.
Right.
We have a certain capacity to successfully manage stress in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so on a given day, if that tank is, half full, then we have lots of space. As things hit us, we just have a greater capacity to go, oh yeah, I can step back, I can take a breath.
Mm-hmm.
I can, get grounded and centered again. But the more that tank gets filled, if it gets,
filled with stress.
3/4,
I see.
full, as it approaches, that max capacity, we're going to have much less capacity to stop and take that breath, to take that step back.
Right.
And so that's an important part of, monitoring. What's going on in my life as a whole?
Mm-hmm.
That's going to influence how successful I'm going to be.
Absolutely.
In sitting down and properly managing being in trades.
Yeah. If every morning you come into work or come in to sit down and you're already 75% full, you're coming in like with a really short fuse.
Right, exactly.
And I have found so consistently that when I am running late, something comes up that I have to deal with before I sit down, and I'm sitting down at like 9:20 and there's 10 minutes to the bell, that I'm flustered and that I'm racing to get my watch list ready, and it almost always results in, if I trade that day, I'm just behind the ball and everything.
Right. Mm-hmm. So in this slide, understanding the fight or flight response. So this is going back to some of the brain stuff we were talking about. The autonomic nervous system has two complementary branches. The sympathetic branch, which really does control the fight, flight, freeze, or fold responses to perceived threats. And the parasympathetic branch, which is in charge of our ability to rest and digest, which acts to calm and restore the body following engagement of the sympathetic branch. Because we have the best access to our executive function when the system is balanced, we aim to maintain equilibrium. So it is really, I've actually spent a lot of time thinking about the autonomic nervous system and these two branches. One of the things that's really cool about mindfulness practices is it's a way of engaging that parasympathetic branch. When we begin to be much more aware of our breathing, and our breath is that powerful tool, that is our direct access for calming the reactivity of the sympathetic branch. So when we start to pay attention, we start to feel these things arising in our body. This is, these are the mechanics of why mindful breathing actually works.
So something that's really important to understand about these two branches is that they're complementary. We wouldn't want to be in the parasympathetic all the time, even though we think we would. And the other one is painted as this negative thing. I have it up here in red, fight, flight, freeze, or fold. We think of it as what to get away from all the time. It's actually what allows us to focus on things. It is what allows, our extreme focus. And so one of the reasons that we work so hard to get to the parasympathetic is that in our society we're often driven to be, you know, we're drinking coffee and we're
constantly
Red Bull or
stimulating
something.
ourselves.
We're really
Yeah.
trying to make the most of things and be on. And in order to do that, sometimes we can get, and from like trauma that happens in life, we can get really locked into that response. And so that's why it is important to have practices like mindfulness, yoga, things that help us to slow down.
Right. Well, one of the things, Diane, that you've shared is that the sympathetic and parasympathetic branches often work together, you know, like the gas and brake in a car.
Okay.
You know, that you need both aspects to, you know, properly drive.
Yeah.
So the idea of, you know, really paying attention, it's like, when do I need to, you know, put my foot on the gas and move forward?
Right.
When do I need to back off and slow down?
Yeah.
So, you know, this idea of developing a capacity to move back and forth with these two states, you know, is how we, you know, properly manage whatever activity we're engaging in.
And I like that analogy of the gas and the brake, because when I think about this, you know, coming from the place it did in our early evolution, it's like having that really touchy gas pedal or something, you know.
Yeah.
Boom! I didn't mean
Yeah.
to go that fast.
Right.
But there's a way that how this was really meant to help us was the sympathetic side. It was meant to help us get out of a dangerous situation
Yeah.
Right.
and keep us alive.
Right.
And the sympathetic was really only there to help us get back to normal.
Right.
The parasympathetic.
I'm parasympathetic.
Yeah.
It's only there to
Right.
help us get back to that, you know, back to that equilibrium.
Right. Right.
So factors in decision making and the role of patterns. We can use our understanding of what's happening in the brain and body to gauge where we are and to exact strategies to retain our brains and regain balance before we tip into destructive trading patterns. So earlier we discussed the fast pathway of the emotional brain versus the slower pathway of the rational brain. So consider this. Roughly 90% of our thinking is automatic and unconscious, while about 10% is the more methodical thinking that we are consciously aware of. What are those automatic thoughts comprised of? Much is helpful, but some is not. Let's look at the process through which decisions are made. So one of the things, I mean, it is pretty shocking to hear that 90% of the activity going on in our thinking is coming from this automatic, largely subconscious place. That only 10% of our thinking is what we consider when we think about thinking, what we're actually thinking about there.
And the reason that it's so much is that there are so many things that we've learned to do.
Yeah.
Right.
We've learned to brush our teeth and tie our shoes and drive our
Drive a car.
Right.
We've learned those. We can do them mostly automatically.
Yeah.
Right.
And when it said some are not beneficial,
Yeah.
those are the ones that are really emotionally driven.
Yeah.
That it's based on, you know, an experience that we had maybe early in our life or at some point that was a big experience that we, you know, developed some kind of a part, we call them parts, some kind of a part that pops up, or, you know, beliefs that come through that shadow our thinking. And so that's when we can have one of those, you know, actions. It can be a word, it can be a thought, it could be anything that kind of pops up that is an automatic,
Right.
you know, that's linked more to the old reptilian
That
brain.
leaves you wondering, why did I do that?
Why did I even say that? You know,
Interesting.
where did that come from?
Well, and so from a purely like behaviorist standpoint, you know, there's stimulus and
Yeah.
response.
Yeah.
But there's a whole world going on between those two things. So,
On a surface level, there's thoughts and
Right.
there are emotions. We can recognize those pretty easily.
Yeah.
right, so as something is unfolding, things are going on, you know, where it's the easiest thing to be aware of are the thoughts that are moving through us. You know, because we can get pretty engaged with that thinking. To the degree we can get the tunnel vision where we think these thoughts are the only thing that exist, which can really lead to things like, you know, catastrophizing, you know, or believing, you know, things like confirmation bias, where
Yeah.
the only thoughts we're having are the ones that confirm what we're already thinking.
Right.
Right.
And all of that, you can see how that can just lead to a wide array of mistakes.
Yeah.
So there's a good bumper sticker or poster maybe. Don't believe everything you think.
Right.
Yeah.
So then that next level, becoming more aware of the emotions,
Mm-hmm.
which is part of what we've been talking about. Says, I'm aware of my thoughts. Okay, what am I actually feeling?
Right.
And in my work with clients as both a trading coach and as a psychotherapist, I'm constantly struck by whenever I ask someone, what are you feeling there? How quickly they will actually not name the feeling.
Mm.
They'll launch into a wide array of thoughts.
Mm.
Mm.
So that there is this difference between the thoughts that are moving through us and the actual emotions.
And another process that's really interesting to see is that people will name the emotion, but they'll name it something much smaller than what it really is.
Right.
Interesting.
So being able to actually identify and
Yeah.
sometimes even say out loud,
Yeah.
wow, I'm really scared right now.
Mhm.
Right.
Or I'm really frustrated.
Yeah.
I'm angry.
I'm sad. I'm embarrassed.
Right.
And giving that its actual name. And because when we're in those triggered places, those emotions, when they get strong enough,
Yeah.
begin to generate their own category, their own types of thoughts. So my fearful thoughts
Right.
run in a certain direction. My
Right.
angry thoughts run in a certain direction.
And there is a lot that branches off from that. There's there are parts of us that try to minimize those emotions. That's
Right.
not okay to have those emotions. It's not okay to voice them. That's keeping them. That's pressurizing them.
Right.
Interesting.
So then, this next category down, what are the experiences that we've accumulated in our life that that tend to take us towards these particular emotions, towards these particular thoughts. This, mammalian, reptilian brain that we are, carrying, it has a very hard time distinguishing things like time, place, and person. So if we've had an experience somewhere in our past that feels somewhat similar to what we're currently going through,
Yeah.
that mammal inside us has a hard time saying, oh, wait a minute, this is a completely different experience.
I see.
It defaults to, okay, well, this is a lot like that one, so how did I respond back then? What did I learn? And this is all happening lightning fast.
Right.
Think back for a minute to that slide earlier that talked about what's happening with the emotional hijack, right?
Right.
And there's that. Now we're confirming with the other threat records, right?
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
the similarity too. And it's like, oh, we've got to check,
Right.
move forward,
Right.
even though it's a totally different situation.
Right.
And we have we have a really strong tendency for both experiences that are influencing us and the next category that we're going to talk about, beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
This is all subconscious.
Right.
We very rarely hold this in our awareness as we're moving through an experience.
We can get there with mindfulness practice. We can
Right.
start to say, wow, I have a belief that's sitting right there. And when you get to that point,
Yeah.
you actually feel a little amused by, is that what's behind this?
Right.
It's pretty interesting. Or you might have a whole lot of compassion. Wow, is that what's behind this?
Right.
But we are hardwired to remember the negative experiences, the dangerous experiences.
Right.
Because the memory of those is what can save us,
Keep us
in
alive.
life-threatening situations as our evolutionary ancestors had to go through.
Right.
So if to counter it, if we want to, it's really a useful thing to ground ourselves in our positive experiences every day.
Right.
To take note of, and that's why gratitude journaling and things like that are really positive. I think doing it as a whole body exercise, where you literally let the entire thing flow through you, can be really useful. At least once a day. It doesn't even have to be about trading.
Yeah.
It could be about anything.
So when we talk about beliefs that can influence the actions that we take, and this is, we could probably spend all day moving through the kind of beliefs that can influence us, but we'll try to touch on these. Think about, for somebody who is a perfectionist, beliefs that they are carrying around what failure means.
Right.
So
Yeah.
if you're carrying a belief
Yeah.
that it is absolutely not okay to fail,
Yeah.
and you put that up against, when you think about success ratios in trading, what is it like what's considered to be really good is like what, 70 to...
In terms of trade, in terms of accuracy, if you're trading at 70% success, you're doing quite well. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. I mean, you can be profitable less than that, but 70% is really solid.
Right.
The perfectionists might always feel that it has to be that little bit higher.
Sure.
You can't quite just be that. That's not good enough. It needs to be 75. It
Yeah.
needs to be something.
Right.
And that belief underlying could be linked to something somebody wouldn't be conscious of, like if I fail,
Yeah,
I'll lose everything.
Right.
sure.
If I fail, no one will love me.
Right.
You know, something more immediately survival oriented from, you know,
Right.
much younger time.
And without, giving some amount of time to exploring, what are my beliefs around trading? These things are going to be influencing you from a completely subconscious place.
Yeah, yeah. I know one of the things that I often say to myself, I'll say, number one, I'm frustrated. That's the thing I say out loud a lot. I'm frustrated. And usually it's, I maybe had a great entry on a stock and I sold it way too soon and now it's ripping up without me, and I either am frustrated that I didn't hold it longer, or I feel like this is unacceptable.
Right.
I'm frustrated and this is unacceptable. It's unacceptable for me to be not capitalizing better on this no-brainer opportunity.
Mhm.
It's unacceptable for me to have bailed out so soon. And then the action that I will sometimes take is to jump back in.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, I'll be in something with great entry, I'll sell it, and then I get back in way up here,
Right.
and it drops.
Right.
So I get back in way up there out of frustration and feeling it's unacceptable I didn't make more on this.
Right.
Right.
And then I lose on it, and then I'm furious.
Right.
Right.
Then I'm just like through the roof, crazy frustrated, and that can be the beginning of me just aggressively trading to try to now make back my losses.
Right.
And those are days that I could even go into tunnel vision and trade for hours. Just anything that's moving, I'll jump in and jump out, and I have to be really careful because in the past, those types of days, lacking really very much competence in the market, I could make some huge mistakes. Those types of days today, I am a more competent trader,
Right.
and so I can kind of
Selfish.
get away with trading in an emotional state
Yeah.
for a period
Right.
of time because my not always, my accuracy can definitely decline, but I'll also have some winners in there because it's not like I forgot how to trade,
Right.
but that can almost be just even worse
Right.
because sometimes doing something aggressive or a little impulsive or emotionally fueled can result in a huge win because I'm being way too aggressive on
Right.
share size. It would actually be better if I was just consistently losing because I would have consistent reinforcement to not continue
Right.
that behavior. Because I think that's one of those experiences that, the thought of this, I can't believe I just lost, I can't believe I sold where I did, I'm frustrated. Sometimes when I get back in, they keep running, so sometimes it works.
Right.
And of course I'm confirmation biasing myself that I'm
Right.
being optimistic and overconfident, so I'll jump in because, it was unacceptable that I stopped out so soon, I should be able to make more on this, and then
So,
I'm back in.
Right.
so knowing all of that about yourself,
Yeah.
when you do the opposite, so when you do the first three things and you
Yeah.
get to the unacceptable place, right?
Yeah.
And you say this is unacceptable, and then instead of continuing on, you actually shift and you say, I'm going to let the unacceptable be. I don't know what you say to yourself. I don't know if it's we'll let the unacceptable be the acceptable, or we're going to walk away at the unacceptable, or I'm not sure
Right.
what you do with it. But is there something that you do where you're easier on yourself later because you recognize that you kind of ran damage control, that it could have really blown up bigger.
I'm not really good at that because I will sometimes say, all right, that's it, I gotta walk away. And I shut it down, I walk away. And then I'll look back at charts later and be upset with myself because I'll see that they did go up a lot more.
Yeah.
And I'm the guy who, bailed out only to watch the stock rip up 30-40% without me, and look at me, I'm an idiot.
Right.
This is unacceptable.
So
this
it's
is
going
this
on.
is just
It's
so
still unacceptable.
and then the problem there is I can carry that into the next day.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just a very interesting thing with trading, the armchair quarterback, and just the
Yeah.
20/20 hindsight. it's just so instinctual for me to look back and just see what I missed and not see that had I taken that trade, not only would I have been breaking a rule, I would have been taking unnecessary risk, and my day could have gone the exact opposite.
Right.
Right. So yes, but you have awareness around that, so
Yeah.
that's good.
Well, and that
Yeah.
is a really
Yeah.
good reminder of developing that capacity
Mhm.
to turn to, in a lot of our presentations, we talk about the importance
Mm-hmm.
of meeting ourselves with loving kindness, compassion, and acceptance.
Yeah.
And as you well know, I
Mhm.
mean, that is a lifelong endeavor, really.
Yeah.
So with all of these experiences, with the successes, with the setbacks, can I show up and begin to meet myself in a much kinder way?
Yeah.
Which is not to say, that all the mistakes are just okay. That's,
Right.
I mean, they're,
You have to
very
hold
much
yourself
them.
accountable. Yeah.
Right. But to meet ourselves with with much more compassionate criticism
Yeah.
rather than judgmental criticism.
Right. Yeah. So on those days where I walk away up maybe only, like today is a great example. Today I was up about $4,000 at my best point of the day,
Mm-hmm.
and then I took a trade that was a little aggressive, and I lost about 2,000 on it. So I was up only 1,900. Typically, if I give back half my day, I walk away, and I did not walk away. I continued to trade because I wanted to try to make back what I had
Right.
lost, and I thought that I still had an opportunity to keep trading and make that back. And then I took a few more trades. I was up only $38 on the day,
Right.
and then I took a few more trades and I finished up about 1,100. So it's one of those things that that ability to have compassion. I could walk away now today and say, hey, you know what? You're up $1,200, $1,100, whatever it is. That's a decent day. You should be happy with that. And I feel that I'm usually pre-wired to look at that and say, man, you really screwed up today.
Right.
You had a great day. You threw it out the window. Then you overtraded, made back some of it, not all of it. You almost went red on the day, from going up $4,000 to red on the day.
Right.
That's outrageous. And so I sort of feel that the way I'm pre-wired to be a little harder on myself and whatever it is, it makes it in a lot of ways more difficult for me to be successful. And maybe other people who are wired to forgive themselves a little bit more and just let the day go could be.
I actually don't know.
There's a
I don't know if I agree with
where you're going there.
Yeah, that being hard on yourself aspect.
Yeah.
It drives you to do better and
Right.
to do better and to do better. The part that's more difficult is you have to work extra hard with the other side, the
Right.
being
Yeah.
more compassionate.
Right.
So
So all of this stuff, it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that part of you that's really critical,
Yeah.
it helps because it's constantly driving you.
Right.
if we could take that part out of you and have a conversation with it right now,
Yeah.
I guarantee
Yeah.
it would say, I built this whole thing. I did everything
Yeah.
for Ross.
Right.
I never get any credit.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's all about
and
balance.
and that's the other piece is it didn't build everything. It
Mhm.
played a really important role
Right.
in everything. You built everything, and it was important that you had the compassion and the other aspects that you developed of like self-inquiry and self-discovery
Right.
Right.
to be
Right.
able to transcend level after level of trading.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because a big part of what happens, and I think we're about to talk about this, but with emotional hijack, a huge part of what's actually happening is the emotions are beginning to hijack our thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So, when that begins to occur, we start dipping into emotional logic.
Mm-hmm.
So from this particular feeling,
Mm-hmm.
so when you have that frustration, when you have that upset about what has just been occurring,
Yeah.
you start to generate those thoughts of, I can fix this.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
If I stay in,
Yeah.
I can turn this loss into a win.
Totally. Yeah.
And because sometimes that actually does happen,
Right.
it starts to reinforce
Yeah.
a bad habit.
Yeah. Yeah.
So even if one time out of 10
Mm-hmm.
it pays off,
Mm-hmm.
our system remembers that one success
Yeah.
and goes, oh, wait a minute.
Right. Right.
Because we're
That's
already
also-
in that hijacked state,
Yeah.
and our thoughts are being influenced by the emotion.
Right. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Here, yeah.
So we've talked a lot about this actually at this point. The spectrum of emotional trading begins with heightened focus and ends with emotional hijack. And so, in the beginning, this is really positive. Adaptive anxiety, engagement of the sympathetic nervous system is helping you to focus. You might feel an increased heart rate, you might have a postural shift, mental clarity.
Yeah.
All of that is good, right? At the point of emotional engagement, the emotionality is heightening, subconscious content like beliefs and experiences are coming closer to the surface, kind of pressing a little bit. There may be a blend of excitement, low-level worry, uncertainty, and fear. Anxiety heightens and is less adaptive, meaning adaptive anxiety is beneficial to us. It helps us.
Sure.
Maladaptive anxiety can result in either impulsivity or, hesitation or paralysis. So intensifying nervous system response leading to increased physiological effects like heat, sweating, etc. Pressure, the feeling of pressure is increasing. One may feel more unsure, indecisive, or alternately impulsive.
So in these two stages, this is where actually something like flow state can begin to emerge. So we were talking about the importance of on that sympathetic branch, this heightened engagement. Mm-hmm. So even something like fear can be part of that heightened engagement if we're managing it properly. All of that can, move us in the direction of, being, as I was saying, in the flow, on our game, fully engaged and properly riding that wave.
Yeah, yeah.
So the question is, how connected are you?
Right.
And the question is, how much are you aware of, not just in the market, but in yourself?
Right.
So it's being able to hold a lot to enter into the flow state, and yet, as you do, it feels effortless.
Right. Which is a really cool thing to experience, which I know you've experienced in trading and probably in other areas.
Yeah. No, certainly. There's definitely been days where a stock is moving very quickly and I am much more engaged. I'm sitting upright, I've got my legs crossed, and I'm just zoned in on the level 2, on the chart, and then buying the dips and selling in the breakouts and buying the next dip and selling in the breakout. And some of those days I've done incredibly well. Sometimes towards the end of those days, a lot of times I do really, really well and then I start to fade a little bit. And maybe that's overstaying my welcome on the stock and getting a little overconfident after a series of really good, solid trades.
Right.
And I do have to be careful that when I start to pull back, that I cut quickly and don't, continue to draw down.
Right, and that's an exact, so then we start tipping into emotional trading.
Mm-hmm.
So trading that is driven by strong emotions and irrational subconscious beliefs and motivations,
right,
rather than by rational decision-making skill and well-thought-out trading rules.
Yeah.
Examples are hesitation, impulsivity, self-doubt, or even overconfidence.
Mm-hmm.
There's often a feeling of high stakes and pressure.
Yeah, these are the trades where it has a chance of getting me back to break even.
Right.
Where the stakes are now higher. If this trade works to its fullest extent, and I don't sell any of it until here, then it's going to get me out. And that's not within the strategy of scaling out as I have a winner. That's basically all or nothing.
Right.
And that starts to get into the territory of me saying, I'm just going to set this trade and I'm going to walk away from my computer. And I either come back and it's a home run or a strikeout.
Right.
Because I'm just kind of throwing it up to the hands of the market or whatever. I'm no longer actively really trading. I'm just letting this sort of emotional... At that point, it's very close to just being a gamble. I mean, again, it's somewhat educated, but like maybe a roulette table that you've seen is hit black 11 times in a row, and it's an educated gamble to say it's probably going to land on red at some point. You don't know whether it will or not on that next time. And you could just as easily be wrong.
Right, and I remember that being, that was a question that would often come up in our conversations. It's, at any given moment.
Yeah.
Holding within yourself that question, am I trading or am I gambling?
Right.
So at this place of between emotional engagement and emotional trading, that's a really important question to hold somewhere in your awareness.
Yeah.
You know, am I still in that zone, or am I starting to tip over into an area that's going to be much more dangerous?
Mm-hmm.
Because as the slide here shows, that next stage
Yeah.
is emotional hijack,
Yeah.
where the overwhelming emotions and negative beliefs hijack our thought process, like we've been talking about, and take over our decision making.
Right.
Our skills, training, and intelligence take a back seat, or as we were saying, like in the trunk,
Yeah.
to impulsivity and emotional reactivity.
Right.
From a hijack state, we may act destructively or recklessly.
Right. Yeah. The line between emotional trading and hijack seems very, very fuzzy to me, because I'm trying to sort of think about, like today, for instance, were a couple of my last trades when I was trying to get myself back to green somewhat emotionally fueled. Were they not as good of quality setups that I took, you know, in hopes that it would get me back to green or back to where I was? Yes. Was I full in emotional hijack? I wouldn't say so,
Yeah.
although I made decisions that were emotionally fueled. I think emotional hijack might have been if I was completely throwing risk management out the window.
Yep.
Like I was using, and I do remember doing this a few times in my sort of early years of trading, where basically I would just start maxing out my account on every trade.
Right.
Because I needed
Right.
to take that big of a position to dig myself out of the hole.
Right.
So it's like, all right, I'm going all in on this. Nope, that's not working, I'm out. Now I'm going all in on this. Nope, that's not working, I'm out, going all in on this.
Right.
And, you know, I was those and totally breaking rules and just going crazy. Those are the days of, I would say, real emotional hijack, whereas emotional trading, and today I did break a rule of not walking away when I had given back half my gains. So it's a little fuzzy there,
Right.
but I also didn't throw throw risk completely out the window.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really good point. This spectrum, probably emotional trading should be like 80% as long. You know, it should
Yeah.
be like, it should be a much
Right.
much broader thing, because emotional hijack really is an aspect at the far end of emotional
Yeah.
trading.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's a spectrum. Yeah.
Exactly. So trading from FOMO, okay, so we've been talking about this. So trading from FOMO is a prime example of emotional trading.
Mm-hmm.
What are other examples of emotional trading? What hooks you? So emotional trading occurs along a spectrum, as we've been discussing.
Yeah.
At one end, we feel nudged by emotions. However, our nervous system is fairly balanced and cognitive capacities are mostly intact. At the other end of the spectrum, it feels as though someone else is driving and we are at best in the passenger seat.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, we've been talking a lot about this already, but Ross, for you, can you think of a time when you felt really hijacked by emotions when trading?
Yeah, I would say the clearest time that was the most significant was in March. It was March 20th, 2019. And it was a day where I was I thought that was going to be the day that I crossed the $1 million line.
I remember this now.
I was very close. I was at like $992,000 or something like that, and I was up like $5 or $6 grand on the day, and I was like, "This is going to be the day."
Right.
I put a lot of weight into that being the day, because that was the anniversary of the day my dad died, and I wanted to do this to sort of honor him. Like this, just, I don't know, I had it in my mind that I was going to do it on that day. And so on that day when I was up 6,000, I was like, I'm only like a couple $1,000s away.
Right.
It's going to happen. And so I saw a stock pop up on my scanner, and it got halted once, and so it was already moving up really quickly. It then resumed that halt and squeezed up again, and it tapped, I think it was $7 or maybe $8, and pulled back just for a moment underneath that level. And then I started buying it at $8, or the whole dollar, whatever it was. I took a starter position that was pretty large. I think it was maybe 6,000 shares. And I recognized right away that there was a hidden seller at that level. And when I bought, even though I saw my order go through on the time and sales, which we'll get into in the Warrior Pro strategy classes, the seller that was there, their order didn't shrink. So clearly it was an iceberg order. And so and for a second it dipped down, and I knew that as it dipped down, I was all of a sudden down like $2,500, and I was like, uh-oh. And then it came back up, and I was like, okay. It started seeing buying again, and I was like, I'm going in. So I just started pressing shift 1 and buying, and that seller wasn't breaking, and I was like, what's happening?
Right.
This is insane. I now have 10,000 shares. And I was like, screw it, I'm gonna keep going. And I maxed out my main account, and it didn't break. And then I switched over to my retirement account, and I started shift 1, shift 1, shift 1. And so I was now fully loaded in both accounts with about 30,000 shares.
Wow.
And it happened so fast.
Right.
And it didn't break. It then dropped and halted going down, and I lost $28,000.
Right.
And I went from being like potentially the day I was going to cross the $1 million mark to losing, almost 30 grand and having, it was basically tied for my worst day of all time, second worst day of all time.
Right.
And I went really quickly, within the span of a few minutes, from a base hit. I mean, I was kind of thinking a home run, but a break of 8 and a quick squeeze up into another halt, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 type of goal, to all of a sudden refusing to allow it to be a loss,
Right.
and trying to basically just buy until it broke out. I was like, there's someone selling, I'll buy their shares, this thing looks strong, and getting confirmation bias.
Right.
Because sometimes, and what often happens, it's not even 1 out of 10, but what often happens when you have a big iceberg type of order is it's sort of like, it's like, I don't know, it's like a gate, and you have all of this pressure building up, and all of a sudden the gate opens and you get this pop, and it breaks through that level
Yeah.
and squeezes up another 10-15%. And it's a strategy that I certainly have traded a lot, that quick snap break of a $0.50 whole dollar, especially when you have a hidden seller. But I threw risk management out the window completely.
Right.
And it's the worst day that I've had, and it was my worst day in more than 5 years. I don't know, it's the worst day I'd had since I was a beginner trader, so I don't know even when it had been that long.
Well, so even as you were talking about it, I'm actually struck by 2 things. One, often around big, difficult events, but it doesn't have to be difficult, but big events in our lives, we have this tendency towards vivid recall. So as you were talking about it, I was just watching your eyes. You could see it all so clearly.
Yeah.
Even though this is a year out from when this happened.
Yeah.
So the way that sort of gets etched in our memory, around this like huge mistake.
Yeah.
But then I'm also listening to just even the way you're, able to talk about it.
Yeah.
And your tone of voice, all of these things, I can hear the compassion you have. That even as you're talking about this being, one of the biggest losses of your career, one of the biggest mistakes, the degree, the level of acceptance that you've been able to turn towards it with. It's a huge part of what we're talking about is building that capacity.
Yeah. I would say that it took about 6 weeks for me to make back that money. I was pretty gun shy for a couple days. I actually had a small green day on the following day, and then I lost about 15 grand on the next day. So I sort of just, I wasn't out of the woods. It took me 2 weeks maybe to really emotionally just reset, which was difficult because I wanted to be bouncing back, and I kind of just had to go easy.
Finish line across.
But within 6 weeks or so, I did bounce back across that line, and I was able to sort of let myself off the hook that on that day I was trading a lot of things that were not the market.
Right.
I was trading this threshold that really was meaningless. I mean, the market didn't care about my $1 million goal. It was totally my own thing.
Right.
I was trading this thing with my dad, totally my own thing. I just was not in a place where I was truly trading the market.
Right.
And so, I was able to acknowledge that within a period of time, and so now I'm able to look back on it. Of course, I've made a lot of money since then, and it's sort of water under the bridge. Unfortunately, although I've had some trades since then, of course, that were losses and have been bad, that kind of set the high water mark for me in terms of the last period of time.
Right.
And that's actually a relatively quick recovery, emotionally. I mean, there was a financial recovery too, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But like within a matter of weeks that you were getting back to yourself and
Right, because that really speaks to, you had prior to that event, you had put in a lot of work towards having a very different relationship with yourself on these levels that we're talking about.
That's true.
So for someone who had not done that work,
Yeah.
this would have been potentially a much more devastating loss.
Yeah.
And would have taken a whole lot longer
Absolutely.
to recover back to a place where you could effectively engage the market.
At in the Inner Circle event that we hosted in Orlando, can't remember which one it was, but a fellow came up to me who was, I don't know if he's a co-president or co-owner of this brokerage firm, but he was talking about a trader in the 1990s .com bubble who took a fairly small options trading account and was trading 10,000, 30,000 option contracts, insane size, and over the course of a couple of years turned it into over $100 million, which is crazy.
Wow.
But he never took any money out. They actually forced him to make a withdrawal because he wasn't paying his taxes or something, and so he had a tax issue, so he had to take some money out just to pay taxes.
Right.
But aside from that, he didn't take any profit out. Then the bubble burst, and what was working well for him stopped working. And rather than pivot and kind of adjust or take the money and just say, hey, that was a good run, I don't know, strategy doesn't work anymore, he kept trading. The account's still open and it has basically nothing in it. Wow. It's just gone all the way back down. And he, I guess from the story, it sounds like he just sort of kept swinging for the fences and just kept kind of hitting this dead horse, and it just was not working anymore.
Right.
And he refused. He didn't have that. And I haven't met the person. I spoke, of course, with the broker, but it sounds like he didn't have that sense of awareness to be able to say, okay, I got to cut my losses. I got to stop doing what I'm doing. You know, like it's not working anymore. So you really can't underestimate, regardless of account size, how important it is to be able to have this relationship with yourself. On the one hand, to be able to let yourself off the hook. And another thing on that note that I often say is that when I've been in the lowest of lows of like, I just lost $25,000 or $50,000 or whatever the course is over a period of time, what I often would say to myself at the beginning of my career was that if I start making $200 a day right now, even though $200 a day is nothing compared to losing 30 grand, if I can do this consistently from here on out, it's smooth sailing. You know, I've got it. That's $50,000 a year.
Right.
Over the course of the next 3 or 4 years, I'll make back everything I lost, and I'm going to be well on my way.
Right.
And that was something that I kind of used as a tool to separate myself from that constant measuring stick of being in the negative.
Right.
That no, I'm from the point I turned the corner, I'm positive. And that's really hard. That was really hard for me, and a lot of people have this internal measuring stick.
Right.
You know, that they're like, well, I've put this amount of money into trading, so this is how much I need to make, and now I'm negative, so now I need to make this amount, this amount, this amount, this amount.
Right.
And they're just every
Pressure,
day
pressure.
trading this number, and that's not trading the market.
Right. Exactly.
Right, and it's reducing their mental capacity to actually trade better as they increase that pressure every day.
Yeah.
So, you know, these questions that are up here, you know, we encourage students, you know, to take time to sort of step back, you know, and ask this question.
Yes.
You know, to be aware of where are the places that you've really taken a hit.
Yeah.
And what was happening in that time. Just like you were able to break that down so well.
Yeah.
That's an important skill to develop in your journey as a trader.
Yeah.
So traders might journal about this and talk to somebody about it.
Right.
Talking about something, like, I mean, this is kind of like a traumatic event that happens, right?
Yeah.
You know, and being able to talk about it can be a really helpful thing. And it's also a place where you might notice, wow, I can't talk about this, or I can't talk about this without becoming enraged, or I can't talk about this without going to tears, or, you know, that there's processing that needs to happen.
Sure.
And allowing yourself the room to do that so that you can experience that resilience and move beyond it and be at that next level.
Yeah.
So if you hit the next question.
This is the other side.
Yeah, this is going to be really interesting. Can you think of a time where you felt truly grounded, adept, or in the zone while trading?
You know, off the top of my head, the really bad days are the ones that are more memorable. You know, I'm trying to think about one of the last days where I traded and I was up 5,000, then 10, then 15, then 20. And I've had a couple of them in the last few months. But none of them, no particular day is standing out especially. And maybe that is because I often look at the glass half empty when it comes to my trading, and I fixate on the negative, and I don't reward or really give myself a pat on the back on the positive. I'll say that.
So another way of phrasing this would be, can you think of a time when you were really having fun trading?
Of course, the last couple weeks have been pretty difficult. I would say one of the last days that I was having a really kind of good time was one of the last trips I had. I don't remember which one it was, but I was on my traveling trading station, and I had a very tight schedule. So I was in California, and I sat down at 5:45 in the morning. It was 6 a.m. and I did my watch list. I did my trading. By 9:30, the bell rings. Whatever, I traded, and I think I made $22,000 or $25,000, and then I was done by 10:30. Did my recap, and I had to go. And I was like, I left, and the sun was kind of coming up. It's like 7 a.m. and I was like, man, that's amazing. That's a great day.
Yeah.
And that was, I think, Thursday. Then I traded again on Friday, and then Monday and Tuesday of the next week, I traded from my house instead of coming to the office. And I was trading from the house in the morning, and then I don't remember, I had things I had to do later. So instead of, basically I was just trading really quickly, and then I was out. So I didn't even really have time to overtrade. I didn't really have time to give back a lot of profits because I kind of had to go. And those were days that I felt really good. I felt like I was like the hired talent. I was just coming in, I was doing like my half hour trading, and then I was like...
So like different expectations, right? Like I'm going in and I'm doing this, and one of the things that you said the sun was coming up, and these are things that we often notice when we're in this state that's on the right-hand side up there, is we'll notice things like, the sunshine, or the leaves look really beautiful today, or something
it's almost,
like that.
Yeah, it's almost like a it's like a sort of a boost, a serotonin or kind of boost of like endorphins. Like, yeah, good job, man. Like, you did it. Like, great morning, 2 great mornings in a row, 4 great mornings in a row. Like, you're on a little bit of a roll here.
Right.
And of course, in those moments, I don't recall where I was like year to date or anything like that.
Sure.
I don't know if I was in a great place or not a great place, but it was a nice little stretch. And on those individual days, I was feeling pretty good about myself.
Right. So one of the things that's, even as we're having this conversation, that I'm aware of, the negativity bias, or the negative bias, that, and it goes back to when we were talking about the brain and all of these, evolutionary survival mechanisms. We're again hardwired to remember the negative much more vividly.
Right.
So what that says is that as you're moving through your journey as a trader, it's really important to journal and document and remember the positive.
Right. It's a way of like tapping into that and like going back to it and grounding in it. It's sort of like what I was talking about earlier about like gratitude journaling. Pema Chodron, who writes a lot about mindfulness, calls it cheerfulness practice. So we often bend toward the the negatives, and we remember the harshest times. But if we can dip into, and through like almost an embodiment, dip into those moments and remember and recall those, they live in us and are more accessible on a regular basis.
So that can be a way of helping bring that more into balance, so that we actually are having a more enjoyable time as traders.
That's good. That's a good thought. So why don't maybe we'll run through these ones kind of quickly, because I think we're probably
we've been
going a little long on this section.
So cultivating emotional intelligence. Daniel Goleman developed this idea of emotional intelligence. It has 5 principles: self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills.
Right.
Okay.
So self-awareness, number 1, understanding our strengths and weaknesses. And we've been really discussing, through this whole conversation, we've been discussing a lot of this. Being able to meet ourselves with compassionate honesty, that capacity to be compassionately critical rather than judgmentally critical. And it's really important to be able to slow down, to recognize the thoughts we are having, to name and process the emotions we are experiencing and discover the unconscious beliefs driving our decisions. And this is where things like, keeping a journal. Journals can help us recognize our trading patterns as well as the emotions and beliefs that have played into our decision making. And having watched you in your journey, you do a lot of this.
Yeah. The only thing that I stopped doing with the journaling was I used to keep a calendar where I write my days P&L on it, and it was very hard because every day I would look at it and I would of course see some of the big red days, or if I had several red days in a month and there was no hope of getting back to green, it was not helpful to look at that every morning.
Right.
And so I stopped doing that, but I do still take notes on my trades each day.
And that's, so also documenting, what are your thoughts? What are the emotions that you experienced on this day or in this trade?
Right.
What was going on before it? These are all things that can help you deepen this capacity for self-awareness.
Yep.
Number 2, self-regulation. Know our rules, hold ourselves accountable, and practice self-soothing. So knowing what your rules are, holding yourself accountable, it creates the predictability, it creates a framework, solid expectations, and that is a way that we can create that framework that we're working in, and it's a way that we can develop more compassion for ourselves, because we can look at, am I following the strategy and the rules that I set up for myself? Also, we can practice calming strategies, like breathing, mindfulness, etc., in the moment and in general. So practicing these things outside of trading, and then even in the moment when you're caught in something where you feel that escalation of emotion, where you slow down, you come back to, maybe feet on the floor, slowing down your breathing.
Yeah.
And this is one where we actually, if we can practice paying attention to how are we talking to ourselves?
Right.
What is the conversation I'm having?
Right.
And how often that is so automatic, we're not even aware that we're having a conversation.
Right.
We're just beating ourselves up.
Yeah.
So even, it can be a powerful tool to actually begin to speak to ourselves out loud, even though that may make people think that you are, or in the room around you might, think that you're a little strange, but...
the word that comes up for me is allowing.
Yeah.
Really just allowing.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's many times where I would talk out trades. Okay, I'm waiting for the next pullback. Be patient, wait for the pullback.
Right.
Okay, the high of the last candle's 345. I'm buying at 345, my max loss is 325. This should go back up to 375.
Right.
Okay, it's doing it. Calm, cool, stay focused, let it do its
Awesome.
thing. Don't need to chop out and bail just because it hit 360 and then dropped to 350. Let it work, do its thing. This pattern usually works. Sometimes I will be overconfident and I'll say this. I've never seen a setup like this not work out. Don't sell, hold tight. But that can be helpful. That was something I did more when I was getting started, before I was live streaming in front of folks. But even when I'm live streaming, I am really, in a lot of ways, doing exactly that, because I'm articulating what I'm trading instead trading in silence.
Exactly.
So yeah, okay. And the self-regulation, holding accountability to rules, it's such a tough one, because no one will hold you accountable except for yourself.
Right.
Sometimes you can kind of have a buddy system or a therapist or someone that can help you a little bit, but it's something that I still struggle with, because, of course, there have been times where breaking rules, I get away with it, and I end up having if I hadn't broken that rule, this is one of these things for me that's so hard, is that if I sometimes feel like the rules are like training wheels, and that they can hold me back. You don't win the Tour de France with a set of training wheels on.
Right.
And it's sometimes in flow state. You need to be able to be free from that.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's part of sometimes how I justify, well, this is genuinely a great setup. Have I already given back half my gains? Yes, but it doesn't change that this is a great setup.
Right.
So do I take the trade?
Right.
And then I take it and it works. Well, of course it works. It's a good setup. Yeah, and then that's a really tough spot, because technically, because of a trade I'd taken earlier, which maybe wasn't a great one or whatever the case is, I had that big drop, and if that last trade didn't work, then all of a sudden my day's ruined.
Right.
So one of the things that is an important part of the rule is, when you break one of the rules, you can't just sit and stare at the market. You have to walk away.
Right.
Yeah.
Because when you sit and stare, you see other people making money and you just feel frustrated.
And that just,
Right.
Gives you FOMO.
So the third one, motivation. It is helpful to remember why you are pursuing trading and what it means to you.
It's a great one.
When we meet challenges or experience a major loss, we may lose sight of our path and diminish our successes. This is a time to take stock of our entire experience, including lessons learned. We also can check in to see how realistic our goals are, given where we are in the learning of trading, which is another topic that we'll be talking about later on. Taking time to remember what brought us to trading and what we value most about it may help us access a renewed perspective.
That's great.
Yeah. So, paying attention to what's driving this, what are we trying to achieve, and being honest and realistic with what our current expectations can actually be.
Yes.
Really allowing yourself to see the bigger picture and your own values.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very easy to get into comparing yourself to others.
Mm-hmm.
But if you came into the market to make 200 a day, and you're having days where you're making 1,000, and then losing half of it and you're all upset,
Right.
you're still up more than 200.
Right.
So, you're losing sight of why you're really here.
Right. Number 4 is empathy, meeting ourselves the way we would meet a friend. So when we experience challenges and losses, we must meet ourselves with honesty and empathy. Meeting ourselves with honesty and empathy, even in the face of extreme emotion, self-criticism, and negative beliefs about ourselves, allows us to shift behavioral and trading patterns that may have previously held us back. This one is really key to moving along that spectrum of learning how to trade and moving up, from being a beginner to becoming an expert at it. You need to be able to meet yourself at each level, especially at the levels where you really are figuring it out and taking on more emotional responsibility.
Right. And we can't emphasize this one enough, the importance of meeting ourselves and even practicing for those around us, with loving kindness, warmth, compassion, and acceptance. These are the tools that will help us survive the difficult times.
Yeah.
And make it much easier to navigate when those difficult emotions hit us.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big one.
And then finally, the social skills, being able to, just as you were talking about, being able to articulate your experience without defensiveness. That is a huge one. So often when setbacks occur, we fall into defensiveness even with ourselves, because those harsh critics are so active. It makes it difficult for us to accept and learn from mistakes unless we can begin to tone down the defensiveness and see things much more clearly.
All of us have that. All of us have that inclination to hide aspects of ourselves. And,
Right.
and trading is a great way, trading and talking about trading and naming some of these things is a great way to grow in general.
Right.
Yep.
And so these 5, principles of emotional intelligence, the fortunate thing is that when it comes to emotional intelligence, we have that capacity to increase it and improve.
Right.
With practice, we can build a greater sense of emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say that has definitely been my experience since putting my mind to it.
So meeting and managing emotions, these questions are less for you, Ross, and they're more for all of the students that are looking at this to ask themselves, how can understanding the mechanisms at work in emotional trading and emotional hijack help you with your trading? How can understanding the principles of emotional intelligence help you make better trading decisions? Have you been able to identify any of your patterns? Have you discovered underlying beliefs that these patterns may be linked to? What are habits or mechanisms of self-care that help facilitate a more grounded state for you as a trader? And even though I said you didn't have to answer them,
if you want to, you
definitely
can.
feel free to comment.
But we would encourage you as students to really take time with these questions.
Yeah.
Because everything that we've been talking about today, as you begin to ask yourself these questions, it'll help you to develop a greater capacity for a positive relationship with yourself and to catch your blind spots.
Yeah.
Right.
What are the things I've been missing?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the important things was to develop kind of an internal list of things that should put me on guard for being really emotionally impulsive.
Right.
Giving back half my daily gains, going from green on the day to red on the day, going down a certain amount on a trade or on the day, having a stock getting stopped out and having it totally rip up without me. because some of these things, when they happen, it's just so easy for me to fall into an emotional trading type of place.
Right.
So developing kind of my internal, list of thresholds, and there's only like 4 or 5 of them, but they're very specific, and when they happen, I know I have to be very careful. I probably should stop trading as soon as they do happen.
Mm-hmm.
I don't always. And that's something that I also am kind of really aware of, that I'm trading right now with like a, red flag out. I've got to be really careful.
Yeah.
I'm right at the edge, and if I start to maybe make a little progress, I might be able to get kind of back into an okay place, but I've got to be careful. And as a beginner trader, I would not advise trying to trade in that zone,
Right.
because it's so easy just to slip right into full hijack.
Exactly.
So strategies for meeting your inner trader. These 3 things are things that we talk about a lot in Mindful Monday and FOMO Friday.
Which is on the pro level, gives you access to.
Yeah, so Warrior Pro students, you guys have access to the Mindful Monday and FOMO Friday sessions. Yeah.
For all of the things that we've talked about today, all of the emotional trading, emotional hijack, all of those aspects of things, these are really the keys to meet yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Mindfulness, a mental state achieved by focusing one's awareness on the present moment while compassionately acknowledging one's feelings, thoughts, and bodily sensations. Mindfulness is comprised of awareness, attention, and intention. So you can always practice with any one of those 3.
Mm-hmm.
They dynamically work together. And I recommend practice curiosity.
And the second one is one, in our FOMO Friday sessions, we do a lot of this work of parts work. So this is based on the work of Richard Schwartz, Internal Family Systems. And basically the upshot is that the self is not a single unified entity. There are multiple dimensions or parts of self that have distinct roles, motivations, beliefs, and behaviors. We can become aware of our parts and the patterns they promote utilizing mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
We can come to have an easier and more collaborative relationship, even with our most troublesome parts.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we begin to experience more freedom and success.
Mm-hmm.
So listen, inquire, appreciate.
And then finally, radical acceptance, which is the work of Tara Brach, another psychologist. The willingness to compassionately acknowledge, tolerate, and completely accept reality just as it is, rather than insisting it be something that it isn't. The ideas here are: be your own best friend, accept every part of you, trade the market you are in, not the one you wish you were in.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I sometimes trade as if this is the last day of the market, like ever. And I think it's I don't know what it is, but it's an aspect of myself that on the one hand wants to make as much as I can on this particular day, and is fearful of missing opportunities, and if I don't make as much as possible, what am I doing? It's a bad reflection on me. I should be fully capitalizing on these stocks that are moving up, and being able to really be totally okay with walking away,
Right.
up or down, whatever I'm at, and not carrying weight around it, both in the positive and the negative,
Right.
is something that I'm still really trying to do.
Well, and that's where, especially in the parts work that we talk about,
Yeah.
being able to identify and recognize these different parts of you
Right.
that carries, really specific agendas and ways of engaging in the world.
Right.
Some of the work that we've done is, especially when you begin to identify polarized parts of you,
Yeah.
different parts of you that may have completely different agendas,
Sure. Yeah.
and they start going to war with each other,
Yeah.
which can make for some really, it's really crazy making, and
Yeah.
cause you to do all sorts of irrational
Right, where one's
things.
more in control and then the other one is. But what you end up feeling usually is a lot of exhaustion.
Right.
Because there is so much inner struggle.
Right.
And so as we're able to use mindfulness and radical acceptance to expand our container,
Mm.
to make a larger space in our awareness where we can begin to hold these polarized parts of us,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
then we can begin the process of helping them make peace with each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's a lot of the stuff that we talk about, on the pro level, in the Mindful Monday and
Yeah.
FOMO Friday sessions.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So we're coming to the end here. Creating your toolbox and trading space. These are just some tips for kind of setting yourself up and things to practice with. Setting up your space, pay attention to where you trade, how do you feel about the space, what else do you use the space for, what does the space reflect about you and the way you carry trading in your life, what adjustments, if any, would you like to make?
And then the second one, really preparing to trade. paying attention. How do you start your day? Do you have set rituals that you follow? Even taking 5 minutes to slow down, check in, and take your trading temperature can be helpful toward not getting caught in emotional reactivity while trading.
Yeah.
Self-care. Do you take time for people, places, and/or activities that you love? Do you practice self-acknowledgement and self-acceptance? These are ways of accessing parts of you that are needed for meeting challenges and difficult emotions. Internal resources help us soften and retain more cognitive and emotional flexibility.
And then finally, create your trader support toolbox. Make a list of the items, activities, people, etc. that support your best trading. Begin to pay more attention to what supports your focus and calm during trading and what disrupts it.
Yeah.
So I think that's the end of our...
Yeah, this is great stuff. This is really good. Okay, so we'll let you guys take a little break, and we'll come back for part 2 in just a few minutes.
All right.
See you then.